Well, hello and welcome to our little discussion of production possibility curve. I know you've looked at it in your readings, but I think it's worth just taking a few minutes to point out a couple of things which might be sort of interesting. We know that in this we're talking about an idealized world in which there's just two resources, or rather two goods rather, and I don't care what the resources are. Whatever resources you have, we can allocate the production of one or the other. So let's suppose that we first consider the curve itself. It's a trade-off between more of one good and a little bit less of another. And this is a construct we use for many items in economics, and that's the fundamental idea, the trade-off that we use all the time. And in this case, you can imagine starting with putting all resources to the production of X, you get something like that. But now, construct the curve as we go. Imagine losing or giving up a little bit of X and taking all the resources freed by that, still producing that quantity of X in the most efficient manner possible, but it's at this level. Then produce Y, most efficient manner possible, you get something like this. So we see the trade-off, less of X, more of Y. Now let's continue the exercise, do it again. Let's move from there down to there, and we get that much. And so you keep on going along till you get the whole curve. Of course, the real principle here is that this curve has a particular shape. Note that when you give up the first little bits, where you haven't produced much, and put it into the other good, the trade-off will change. The trade-off will change as we move along in this case. So let's take a look at how this shape goes. I'm going to start now from Y as opposed to X. I'm going to say I've just produced a little bit of X, not too much, and I produced quite a bit of Y. And when I give up, say that's 1 unit of Y, and when I haven't produced much X already, it seems like I get a pretty good chunk of X. But note what happens as you move along here. If I give up another unit of Y after producing a lot of X, then the amount that I can produce in addition for X is actually quite small relative to before. Okay? The principle is that in general, as you produce more and more of any particular output, it takes proportionally more and more resources to do it. And it's because the productivity, when you push it to the extreme, has diminishing returns. An important concept which I want not to remember. Of course, we also have a number of definitions now. We've decided what efficient points are. So this divides the area into those combinations of outputs which are feasible for production and not feasible for production. It also divides out of those points which are feasible and not efficient from those points which are feasible and efficient. We can clearly produce anywhere in this area, but it's not efficient because we could have produced more of at least one good and possibly both. So having looked at the trade, now let's look at technology, the trade-off. Let's look at the technology. What we do know is that technology tends to improve the amount of goods and services that we can consume. So let's think about this as a simple way. We have agricultural products and shelter. And now I have a production possibility curve and irrigation is introduced. I've selected these goods primarily because we know that irrigation can improve the quantity of agricultural goods. Well, now go through the same conceptual exercise we went through to produce the first production possibility curve. Give up a little bit of agricultural goods, get some shelter, and of course you produce a new curve which lies everywhere outside the other. Note that I've added on more increase in agricultural products than I did in shelter. Not clear that agriculture gives a lot to shelter. And so we all now have a possibility at least of being better off due to the shift in the production possibility curve. Well, if we're thinking about consumption then, let's talk about one or two items here. One, production possibilities are also consumption possibilities. If you can produce it, then that would be the combination that you can consume. And clearly with irrigation, we get more, which means that we can produce more of any one good. Okay? and possibly more of both without reducing the production of the other. And that's this quadrant in here. Now note it's important I distinguish here because here it's very clear that the economy as a whole is better off because there are more goods that you can consume. Not clear what happens if you're outside of this quadrant. But in here, interesting because we can now think of other ways that we might get into those areas where we're not sure about. One of them might be trade. So now think about trade first in terms of what we have to give up and what we receive. Often this is called terms of trade. And you can think of the production possibility curve as being your internal terms of trade. In my own domestic economy, this curve shows every time I give a bit of X how much Y I get, or vice versa. If you trade with the rest of the world, they may have a different idea of what they want in exchange. In particular, in this world, might be one in which 8 units of wool could possibly trade for a full ounce of gold. And if you could do that, note that you'd be outside your production possibility frontier. But this new point is actually a place where you might be able to consume. So what we have is a whole bunch of choices along this line. This part would never be chosen because you could have picked someplace in here, so it doesn't make any better. I could have done it domestically rather than going to trade and been better off for it. Which leaves the other part. If you had chosen consumption up here, then and it's better than this, then you can say that we have gains from trade. And so everyone might freely choose to consume along here, then this distance would give you the gains from trade on that particular consumption pattern. So what we now have is a consumption possibility curve, which is not the production possibility curve. We have a portion, at least, where you can trade and be better off, and here you trade internally to be better off. Don't include that part, because that would be clearly inefficient from the perspective of what you can do internally. So, there you go. Trade, consumption, and production possibilities. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.